1, 2, 3, 4. I got thoughts running through my head. I got thoughts, can't you see? I got thoughts, the books I read. I got thoughts, won't you listen to me?
Hello, 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 and welcome to The Author Has Thought. So as I said, back in early January, I started talking about, I made a comment offhanded, one of my little bumpers that I don't think anybody ever watches, or any of the other videos, about the pandemic. And as a matter of fact, I said 2020 is going to be lit with bodies. And boy, was I right. Maybe not in the way I thought. At the time, I believed that the virus was still mostly contained in China, but I could be wrong about that. It might have gotten farther, and I don't exactly remember when I recorded it. So my thought was, at the time, I believe the Chinese had locked down Wuhan. They were doing a lockdown in other places as well, and trying to contain the virus. And we may have had the one case in Seattle or Washington that brought the virus here. And again, I said that as an offhanded remark, but I was deadly serious. I mean, I really did think 2020 was going to be full of dead bodies. I believe, and it's been so fucking long, that's how 2020 is, that at the time we as in the U.S., were rattling sabers with Iran and, could have been days away from war. Ended up not having that war, but we also had the Australian wildfires and all this other stuff that, it's kind of hard to remember now because it's only been 7 months. But, 7 months of 2020 is like a frickin' lifetime. Since then we've had murder hornets, and the pandemic has gotten completely out of control. We've had the Black Lives Matter protests and anti-protest. We've had unmarked federal agents kidnapping people in the streets. It just keeps going on and on. And apparently right now there is the potential of 2 tropical storms and or / hurricanes converging like right outside my door. I think Marco and Laura should just let them merge into one and call them Karen. Kind of made a prediction about there being a lot of bodies this year, and it's unfortunately come true. And so I want to talk a little moderately seriously with humor thrown in, because that's just how I do things, about the pandemic itself. I mean, the easiest thing to talk about is just the science of what we know. And I'm not an expert. I could be wrong about any of this. Hell, some of the experts could be wrong because they're still learning about this stuff. But here's the things that I am pretty sure we know. We know it's transmitted person to person through respiratory droplets, which is when you exhale, you're exhaling some form of moisture, spit. Even if you're not spitting, you're exhaling some. And the louder you talk, the more you talk, the more droplets you exhale. There's been, varying degrees of discussion about, about how many droplets you need to get infected and how far those can travel. And in theory, they travel less far when it's humid and hot, and can survive less, and when they're outside, we do know that, or there's been pretty clear evidence that shows you get more exposure to the droplets when you're indoors longer than like 15 minutes, especially in poorly ventilated areas. But even in well-ventilated areas, you still have a chance to recycle. I believe there was one diagram I saw of a restaurant from some of the Chinese scientists that showed like one person spread it to like 9 other people in the same restaurant. And I mean, So we know it's spread person to person, and we know the most dangerous, most risky places to contract the virus are around other people that you're not exposed to all the time, in enclosed areas with lots of talking and or poor ventilation. Now, I want to talk about the lockdowns or lack of lockdowns in the U.S. Now, the U.S., as of, I think yesterday I saw the numbers, over 176,000 people dead. Let that sink in for a second. 176,000 plus people dead since, I guess, January, if you consider the first case in the U.S. was in January that we know of, that didn't die of anything else but this virus. This easily contractable virus, but one that is fairly easily defeated as far as, stopping exposure to it. So 176,000 plus people dying. We're having 1,000 people die a day. Cases, I forget the amount of cases per day, and it's kind of, that's a subject I'll talk about just a little bit later. But so we have that amount of people dying, even though we know how it's transmitted. We know what the dangers for transmission are. They are being around other people in enclosed spaces with lots of talking and lots of up close talking with lots of people together, because again, the social distancing of 6 feet is kind of the baseline, but they're not really sure if the virus can transmit at a transmissible level farther than 6 feet. And again, that's probably going to depend on the venue that they're in. But for sure, inside, outside, whatever, if you're right up here with people that you don't know, it's transmissible. It's very easily transmissible. So knowing that it's easily transmissible in groups of people that are close together and talking a lot without poor ventilation, without being outside or not, the initial reaction and response was to do lockdowns. And the lockdowns have been at varying degrees, and I'll talk about that in a minute too. But I believe in everywhere that the lockdowns happened, at the very least, what you had occur was the number of cases per day and per week leveled off. In some cases went down, again, depending on where you are, because the virus is not transmit at one time to everybody. It's little by little by little. Everywhere it was tried, cases leveled off and or went down depending on how long you locked down. Naturally, you would think that, okay, we got to beat this, we need to lock down for a significant amount of time, that the cases go down. And in some countries, New Zealand in particular, South Korea is another good one, they did just complete lockdowns, and then built up a testing system where they tested people. Anybody that was infected, they contact traced them. They basically said, this is all the people you've been around, so tested those people. And within months, they had it under control. Now, again, both New Zealand and South Korea have had outbreaks again, because without a vaccine, without something that makes people immune to this, it will continue to resurface. That's how it works. That's how infectious diseases work. We've been dealing with flus forever, and despite having vaccines every year with flus, we still have a number of people die every year of flu and catch the flu. That's the nature of an infectious disease. It's just infectious. Unless you have a cure, a specific cure, it's just not going to go away on its own. That doesn't happen. In the history of humanity, that doesn't happen unless the virus burns itself out by killing people so quickly that it can't spread. Ebola tends to do that with outbreaks, but we still get Ebola outbreaks. Lockdowns work. South Korea, New Zealand, two good examples. Granted, they're smaller countries, But I would say in the especially in the instance of South Korea, in they are a very uh, densely populated area. There's a lot of densely populated areas, and there's rural areas too. But there's a lot of densely populated areas in Korea, South Korea, so that spread can happen rather quickly. And another part of the transmissibility issue is that you can have COVID 4 days without showing any symptoms. In some cases, I've heard numbers thrown around of up to 40% of people who transmit it are asymptomatic. Not that they don't ever develop symptoms, but that at the time they transmit it, they are asymptomatic. They do not show any signs of having it. So temperature checks and that kind of testing is not going to be an effective way to counter transmission, because if you don't know you're sick, and you can just transmit it, and if you're not showing a fever, temperature check won't do anything. By the time between 2 to 5 days, I believe is what they say, you could be asymptomatic for. By the time the temperature check actually dings you, you've been 2 days spreading it around to people. And that's where the danger of this virus really lies, is that there's enough evidence to show that transmission can happen even if you don't know. So anybody you see and interact with that you don't interact with every single day in the same house is a potential carrier. They are potentially deadly. Which is why going to the grocery store, especially in the early parts of this, was all very, 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 very scary. Because you're like, does that person have it? Does that person have it? So that's the transmission. But again, the lockdowns worked. We can show evidence, if you believe in evidence, that lockdowns actually do control the spread of the virus. And again, that's all we're trying to do right now, is control the spread until, number one, we can find effective treatments, and number two, we can get a vaccine. Those are the goals. Those are the long-term goals of, get a vaccine, find better treatments so that not as many people die, not as many people have bad effects from the disease or the virus, whatever you want to call it. Those are our goals. What's the purpose of the lockdown besides controlling the spread? Because you could if you're just not going to fucking worry about the spread until you get a virus, then sure, just willy-nilly go all about. Who cares, right? Just let it spread and let people die, apparently. But if you don't use that lockdown time effectively, i.e. build up hardcore testing, build up hardcore contact tracing, and make sure that when you do ease lockdowns, ease restrictions, you're making every effort to control the spread so that even if you get a little flare-up, a little outbreak, you can find it quickly, find it before it's spread. Find it in that 2-day period when somebody's asymptomatic, so that you can immediately quarantine them without them spreading it to a bunch of people, and isolate them so that you control the spread. Otherwise, it just spreads, as we've seen. So you have to use that lockdown time, whatever time you take, effectively. And unfortunately, the U.S. did not, which I'll get to in a minute. If you've controlled the spread, if you've used your lockdown time effectively to set up those specific things to catch the virus at its earliest stage, when you can keep it from spreading to too many people, then you can eventually start to ease restrictions, open up your economy or whatever, let people go back to doing their normal lives, with the caveat that if this shit breaks out again, you got to lock it down again. You've got to do whatever it takes to keep it from going from one person has it to 5 million people have it. Because I realize people don't understand the math of an exponential growth, but if one person gets it, then they give it to 1.18 people, then that eventually, I think in like 4 to 5 weeks, that one person is definitely two people, and is probably those two people are two more people and two more people, and it's just wildfire. It is literally a wildfire. We've all seen those maps in the disaster movies, and I've watched lots of disaster movies where you see, oh my God, let me show you on the map the spread, and you see the dots just start to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow, and they just don't stop. Well, that's what we're at. That is the reality we are living in, and the only way to slow that down, one of the best ways to slow that down is to lock things down. Apparently, one of the other ways is wearing a mask. Locking down and/or social distancing and wearing a mask. Now, I'm going to motherfuck our government, in specific the CDC, because in the beginning of this thing, in January or February, and even in March, the guidance from the CDC was that masks don't help. They don't help at all. They might help, they might not. And the theory behind that was somewhat of a sound one. It was, we don't want people going out buying all the good masks, the N95 masks that protect our healthcare workers, thus shorting us out of all our supply of masks, and then healthcare workers don't have enough protective equipment. But even from past pandemics, SARS 1, MERS, swine flu, H1N1, Asia, Japan, China, Korea, they've all learned from hard lessons that masks are effective against stuff like this. And masks couldn't have hurt in the beginning, other than the potential to, short our supply so that hospital folks couldn't wear masks, couldn't have masks. I understand that fear, because let's all remember, if we can, back in the before times, right when this shit started to hit, what did people do? They went out and bought all the fucking toilet paper. Not just some of it, all of it, and hoarded it. And they were jackasses selling it, profiteering off of fucking toilet paper, which again, even then was stupid, and now is even stupider. But yes, and of course people went out and bought a fuckload of masks too, and have profiteered off of that. So, CDC said one thing, then they changed their minds, I think in late April, early May, and said, oh no, masks are probably effective. And now it's to the point where masks are one of the most effective ways we can combat the spread, other than lockdowns, of course. And they're saying people should mandate masks. They should wear a mask. But of course, mask mandates are regional, even in some cases local, or not. Skiddy, skidoo, skiddy, skidap, beat up, beat skiddy, beady, beat up.